Well, thank you. Again, my name is LeAnn Buck, and I'm with the Minnesota Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. And for this portion of the webinar, we're focusing on why locally led matters. And for those of you that have been around me, I'm always thinking about mission, meaning, and purpose. And this has quite a bit to do with our history. So when I think of our SWCD history, I like to think that the SWCDs, along with our federal partners, NRCS, I like to think of it in terms of we have the same DNA. And what I mean by that is, our roots are vested in implementing federal, state, and local conservation programs, or having a say or helping to carve out how those policies work. But at the same time, we're also trying to recognize that local autonomy. So how does a federal system ingratiate its way into the local community? The attorneys 75 years ago, the USDA attorneys that drafted the SWCD statute that was applicable to every state, said SWCD citizen boards, having that citizen voice, having that local landowner, that local farmer, that local partner be part of the dialogue and discussion is very key. So today we're again highlighting that. So I have the honor and privilege to work with NRCS State Conservationist Troy Daniell all the time. And it's a wonderful opportunity for our organization as well as NRCS and our Bowser partner, our state partner, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, to continue to look at how we do the delivery of conservation in the state of Minnesota. So for this webinar, we wanted to share our thoughts based on the local work group process and how this impacts all of us collectively. So we'll kick it off. Again, I want to introduce Troy Daniell as the Minnesota State Conservationist. And so Troy, what does the local work group process mean to you?
Well, hi, LeAnn, and thank you for having me on today. For me, it's historical. It's 80 plus years of the foundation of our partnership. It goes back to Hugh Hammond Bennett's vision of local conservation, and it's the foundation of what we do every day. It takes information and input from local farmers and stakeholders, leads it through that local leadership of the Soil and Water Conservation District, and then feeds the beast, so to speak, of the USDA, NRCS, and SWCD partnership of putting conservation on the ground with sound technical and financial assistance.
I love it. So also, Troy, as a state conservationist, you're constantly meeting with different organizations, different individuals, especially leaders of what I would say a variety of organizations, everything from livestock organizations, commodity groups, wildlife organizations, local, state, and federal government officials. So what do leaders of those stakeholder groups, what do they want to know about the local working group process?
Well, quite often it starts with a misinterpretation of the local led and local work group purpose of being an EQIP program or some type of programmatic issue. But the reality is what I try to turn the conversation into is it's their way as producers, as stakeholders, to provide input to not only financial assistance programs, but most importantly, our technical assistance, and help us determine what the local community need. It could be economic, cultural, social aspects. All those things tie into local led conservation. And so my message typically to those stakeholders at the state level or even national level is I rely heavily on that input from the local producers. It's good to hear from national and larger groups and their perspective, maybe an industry perspective, but most important, what does the local community need? What are their resource concerns? Is the wind erosion in their part of the world the big issue? Is it soil health? Is it that we need more technical assistance for our farmers to implement precision ag? So that's usually my message is it's broad based and it's truly what does that local community need?
Wonderful. I appreciate that so much. And again, mission, meaning, and purpose, it all falls together. Another thing, kind of a segue or build upon what you just said, I think it was just even 2 weeks ago, our board of directors, the State Association for Soil and Water Districts met, and we had you and your staff were there to talk about the NRCS, for example, the state health, soil health strategy. And one of the things in that strategy, there are references to the local working groups. And then I think of another example where you and I were talking and you had mentioned that a landowner had raised a concern on a specific issue. And one of the first things you did after you had that phone call with that individual, you went back and looked up what was in that local resource concerns identified at that field office level. So as you get these variety of things or examples, can you maybe share the big picture perspective of how NRCS really does refer to these outcomes? And this goes beyond just, again, I think you mentioned it, it has a big influence on a lot of your agency activities and not just a programmatic effort.
Yeah, I use that personally, and you talked about referencing local resource needs and local priorities. I reference that as much as even this morning, talking to a couple of my staff about CSP and how we're going to guide that next year in our conservation stewardship program. And the first words out of my mouth is, we need to wait till we start hearing from these local work groups this year, and we can start driving how we're going to run the program next year for CSP stewardship. But also another example, the last couple of years, I've heard from various local work groups and SWCDs, other partners, producers. We need more technical assistance in the agronomy world, precision ag. We need more technical assistance with grazing. So we made a slight change to our org chart. And this year we're onboarding brand new, just as recently as this week, grazing specialists. We're about to start hiring some agronomists. Those little things that seem small, but those are the things that drive the technical assistance of the future. And to me, am I the measurement, the outcome, am I meeting what the request is? We can't always. I mean, there's some things that are out of our scope, out of our authority, beyond NRCS that we just don't do or can't do. But anywhere we can, I like to listen to what the local folks want and then try to implement that. And the ultimate goal, the ultimate outcome, are we getting cleaner water? Are we getting cleaner air? And are we measuring improvements on our grazing lands and our forest lands? So it's a big piece. It drives the technical assistance side just as much as anything.
Wow. And again, the full picture, it does make a difference. One of the things too, then, as we segue for our association, this webinar offerings that we've had now today with supervisors, the local elected officials, but also previous to this, we included the NRCS and SWCD staff. So we not only highlighted the local working group process, but we also are referencing it as locally led. And so for our association, one of our forums to provide locally led policy input is through our resolution process. And sometimes we take those kind of ongoing annual processes, we might take it for granted. But I want to use an example. Last year we had a resolution and it came from, I believe, the Chippewa Stonewater Conservation District. And it was pertaining to modifications to the EQIP program, for example, but it also had, therefore be it resolved. And it did reference, consideration, for example, looking at your 4 regional areas for ranking. And again, these resource concerns. So what I'm getting at is, for me as an association executive, words matter, and articulating what you need. I always think groupthink is hard. So the more we can get it into writing or document it is helpful. And I think that goes either way for the local working group process and, or for example, our resolution process and the One Watershed, One Plan for that civic engagement that's included with that as well. So I'm just wondering, would you be able to comment on how, for example, like even our resolution process or these local working groups having the important role of articulating and documenting resource concerns are helpful to both of us, both of our organizations, to you in leading the federal, farm bill programs and activities and your staffing, as well as, from our organization?
That's I'll try to answer that the best I can. That key note that you said, locally led, and to me, the Soil and Water Conservation District board leaders, they're not just board members, they're leaders. They're leaders in their community. They represent a segment of their county quite often. Some parts of the country, they represent pieces of a watershed. Uh, so they're part of their leadership responsibility is gathering input from their local constituents and then packaging that up. And like you said, articulating that message out and trying to actually solve the problem. And sometimes it's a challenge. That's something that we as a agency do not want to dictate directly to the board members. We want them to solve those challenges of how to articulate what the need is internally and then get that message out. And you're right, putting it in writing is imperative. I have a good friend that's still active in the watershed district back home. He's actually on the state board. And Owen Cantrell always says, man, we've got to get this in writing. And then we have to get the writing out to the right people. And that drives policy, that drives future farm bills. That even drives, even though you may seem like Chippewa County is just Chippewa County in Minnesota, some of those things can elevate up beyond me. And I'll take those to our chief, the secretary, undersecretary. Sometimes those issues are beyond Minnesota. And that's where the local leadership comes in with the Soil and Water District. Is they are who we recognize as the local leaders of conservation. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. I've seen change. You mentioned resolutions here in Minnesota. Just since I've been here, I think we've tried to make adjustments from a couple of resolutions. Silvopasture is one of them. We made some changes on silvopasture and offering that. We're working on some things with water retention here and offering new practices. So it means something. And if we can do it, I would hope most state cons, including myself, will be responsive to those needs.
Thank you, Troy, because, and again, those resolutions, many of those that we have shared with you, have come to fruition, and they're going to have impacts as we move into the future. And so again, for the Soil and Water District supervisors in the audience, one of the things that we've been advocating quite a bit is NRCS has a great process for the science of natural resources. And they've been able to take and list resource concerns. And one of the things that I think has been highlighted so many times is how do we use the same language for one watershed, one plan when we identify resource concerns, and then translate that over into, hey, here's what we said in our one watershed, one plan, or our county water plan, and how do we articulate those same priorities and move those into that conversation with our local working group process and peers. So again, language does matter, and I just want to articulate and thank you as supervisors for continuing to think about it. Because at the end of the day, I always say, the other thing I always say is groupthink is hard. And so how we can make it easier and your leadership role to help translate and articulate those priority concerns are huge. And also facilitate, just as much as articulating, translating, but facilitating is just as important as well as local leaders. So Troy, kind of as we look at this, one of the things that I know anytime you're a state conservationist, it means you've worked in many parts of the state, including Washington, D.C. So one of the questions I've had is you've worked in different states, in that experience of working with conservation districts across the country, what would you say might be unique about Minnesota's districts? Because I do like to think we're same but different. So what would you say is unique about the Minnesota Soil and Water Conservation Districts?
Well, apart from the language difference, and that's just a joke, but yeah, I think the first thing is I felt like I was not speaking the same English, but in Minnesota, what I noticed right off the bat is I haven't been involved with any districts here that were not robust and engaged. You don't get that everywhere. I mean, that's just, it's sad, but not all districts across America take their role as being that important, and they should. But I think the leadership, and it's historical. I mean, and I haven't been to a district yet where they don't talk a little bit about their history. If a board member pulls me aside, they like to brag about, and they should, things that they've accomplished in the past through local leadership. But I guess to being robust and engaged and actually making sure that their voice is heard and that they're engaged in agriculture and conservation here in Minnesota is unique. And I hope Minnesota districts realize that, and I hope they continue that path because it's special. It's very special.
Thank you, Troy. And last but not least, again, as we look at what we're unique about, but we also want to think I'm always about continuous improvement. So what advice do you have for Soil and Water District Board members as we continue to do our conservation delivery across Minnesota and work with you and NRCS and your local staff, as well as the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources and a tremendous amount of other partners?
I'd say always be looking to the future there, and but at the same time, don't lose your foundation. You know, we're hearing a lot of buzzwords, and we do from time to time. Seems like every few years there's new buzzwords out there, but you said it yourself, LeAnn, it's still conservation. That's what our foundation is. And don't lose touch with our core. For us, it's our ag producers. It's our forestry folks and our farmers, our ranchers. Don't lose touch with that foundation because, man, number one, they need someone on their side. And I think SWCDs have a history of being on the side of the producers and the farmers that feed this world. So I think it's imperative that they keep that link. It helps the farmers, but I think you'll find real quick that the farmers will be on your side too. But don't lose touch with their background and your heritage, but at the same time, be forward thinking. So in some cases, embrace some of the new lingo, but figure out what we can do to help solve those challenges because air quality, I flew to San Diego last year, and yes, 25 years later, San Diego is a lot cleaner than it is today. I'm sure flying into Minneapolis today is a lot cleaner. So air quality, a lot's been done. We have a lot less erosion. There's a lot of positive things that you can talk about with conservation, but there's still a lot to do because we still have water quality issues that need to be solved. They won't solve overnight. It's ongoing. And we really need to do more with our soil health. I think soil health is beneficial to the sustainability of the country, actually. Our food system depends on it, our economic system. So as you hear buzzwords like climate smart ag or whatever the flavor of the day is, know that it's still conservation. And we are set up as a partnership to deal with it. We have the foundation and we have the programs and the technical assistance that can be readily adapted and adjusted. So be forward thinking, but stay close to your roots too.
Thank you, Troy. And to build upon that, you know, when I look at the advice for my members, I continually think one of the things is I'm a very future oriented person and try to be visionary. And recently, or well, several years ago anyway, I had somebody tell me one of the important things we did at our board retreat was to acknowledge those milestones. And I do think it is important to kind of stop, collectively assess, hey, what have we done? Because that helps us sometimes articulate then where we're going. So for the soil and water districts out there to build upon what Troy is saying, look to the future, but it's also take some time, acknowledge that milestone. Maybe once a year you ask your DC and your district manager collectively what has happened in our county. So we have a good understanding of that as we go into these local work group meetings and or as we work with our county commissioners or the citizens in general. So again, I want to say thank you, Troy, for this opportunity to provide a forum for our members and our soil and water district staff and your NRCS employees with this series of local working groups and locally led conservation. It's been a tremendous opportunity, and sometimes we take what we do for granted, and I don't want our folks to do that. So I think this is a way to take a look and just stop and look at our collective work that we do together, our mission, meaning, and purpose, and move forward as we advance private lands conservation in Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, LeAnn.